Hi everyone, quick note before the show starts. This is a special extended episode because we have a guest, Professor Jenn Cumming, and she is taking me through a review of my year using a strengths-based approach. And you'll hear all about what that means in the show and why it's so useful. So you're going to get to hear quite a lot about me and my life. And in doing so, learn how you can take a strength-based approach to reviewing your year too. She'll explain why that's so important and exactly how you can do it. It's going to be an amazing episode. So grab a pen and paper so that you can take notes. I know you're going to want to. A quick message though, Jen's microphone was a little bit dodged. We thought it was okay, but it hasn't turned out that great. You'll be able to hear her absolutely no problems whatsoever, but it's not quite up to the usual quality. No, it won't affect how inspiring and useful you find this episode though. So enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the PhD Life Coach. And I am really excited because we have a special guest today. She is a leading psychologist and one of my best friends. And so welcome, Professor Jenn Cumming. Do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and then we'll get on with the show?
Vicky, it's so exciting to be part of your podcast. So thanks so much for inviting me to be a part of it. I've known Vicky for over 20 years now. So she is slightly biased when she says I'm a leading psychologist, but I've worked at the University of Birmingham for over 20 years, and I'm a sport and exercise psychologist and currently a professor there, as well as a chartered psychologist. So I've been working a long time in terms of helping people to be able to really recognize and enhance their potential. And through this podcast, hopefully we can talk about how we can do this in a really positive, strength-based way.
Fantastic. And Jen says I'm biased. I am biased, but I am also right, as usual. And one of the things I love most about Jen's work is she has been involved in sports psychology with elite athletes, enhancing performance, but then has taken loads of the work that she did there and applied it into really, really vulnerable populations as well. And I know she'll tell you more about that work at the end of the show, but it means she's bringing this huge wealth of experience of helping a whole variety of different types of people identify their strengths and use that to achieve their goals, enhance their well-being, and generally live good lives. And Jen touched on this slightly in her intro, but the purpose of today is really thinking about reviewing our year. So one of the things that can be really useful to do at the end of the year is to think back over the year. What have I done? What helped me succeed? And all those sorts of questions so that we can really reflect on how the year has gone and then use that information looking forwards. And we have got a podcast coming with another special guest thinking about New Year's resolutions, but this episode is really thinking back across the past year. So I'm going to hand over to Jen because we're not just going to talk about this. We're not just going to tell you how to review your year. Jen is actually going to support me to review my year so that you can see how it's done. You can hear me kind of reflecting in action, so you really see how it goes. And you can then take the questions that Jen asks me and think about them in your own lives too. So, Jen, you are in charge, which is exactly the way I like it.
Thanks, Vicky. I love being in charge, as you know. So what's exciting about this today is that normally this is something that I do for myself, usually around this time of year, December. And I guess just to say that December is a bit of an artificial time point to kind of reflect back on our year. I think everybody has a different sense of what the year is for them. So I know lots of people who work in education, academics. For them, it could be the academic year. So you might be looking back on your year. Maybe it's in the summertime for you because September is when you kick off your next academic year. So it just so happens we're talking about it now, and it ties really well into what people like to do in terms of New Year's resolutions. So, Vicky, we had a bit of a chat about this, and you know I've been doing this for the last couple of years, and you've been kind of wanting to know sort of how I go about doing this. So I think this is kind of a great opportunity to share that. But I guess to say, for me, this is an evolving thing. So each year I have some questions that I think back on, and I like to look back on my responses from previous years, but each year I do it slightly different. So we're going to give it a go and see how we get on today. But maybe the first thing in terms of thinking about looking back on your year is that you want to think about it in terms of what has gone well. So I think often at this time of year, and we're thinking about New Year's resolutions, we're often thinking about maybe what we're lacking in our life or bad habits we have that we want to break, and essentially trying to look ahead in terms of what we want to fix about ourselves. And that's quite a deficit, negative way of thinking about a year. And so I think we're already pretty skilled at doing that sort of thing. But actually, what's sort of missing, maybe a more balanced way of doing it, is to focus on what's going well, what's going right. So when we take stock of things and think about what we want to do more of, then we can come at it from a more strength-based perspective. So that's how we're going to do it today, if that's okay with you.
That sounds perfect. And thinking about all the populations you've worked with, why is a strengths-based approach a good way of doing this?
Yeah, one of the reasons why I really like that, especially for taking a kind of a backward glance in our year, is that if we just focus on what's going wrong, then it can be wrapped up in a lot of negative emotions. So feelings of guilt or maybe shame that we have to fix that bad habit, whatever it is, like spending too much time scrolling on our news feeds and our social media, or, maybe we haven't got as organized as we wanted to, whatever it is, then it comes from a place of shame or guilt. And that's never a good place for motivation for change. So we're starting to think about how we might want to move forward and do things differently. If we're already starting from a negative place, then often the way that we cope is more shutting down, blocking, avoiding. And so it's really, really hard to make successful changes to what we do in our lives if we're coming from that perspective to start with. So if we flip the script and look at it in a more positive, strength-based way, then I think you're going to find yourself being more motivated and excited to make those changes and to move forward. And so you get to test this out today and be your own kind of personal test case. But certainly there's lots of research evidence to also support the fact that when we get better at reflecting on, recognizing, and using our strengths, that can have a whole lot of benefit, including helping us to feel more motivated. But then we also get the win-win of also having better well-being at the same time.
Love it. I'm already feeling motivated. I'm so excited. I love listening to you speak. And I guess the other thing to say is, as we said at the beginning, we've known each other a really, really long time. And you know that I am a recovering, highly self-critical person. I'm an awful lot better than I was about that. But it's certainly always been my tendency to look at what I did wrong. I was always the kid who got 98% on her science test and got very stressed about what the 2% was that I missed. That was the first thing I used to look for in the test. So I think this is something that we both know will be really useful for me. And I'm sure a lot of people listening, it's really common in academia to have that kind of self-critical, perfectionistic approach. So I think it will be really useful for other people too. So cool. What do I need to answer?
Brilliant. So how are you going to record this down? Do you have a piece of paper?
I have a piece of paper. Yes, I have a piece of paper. I have a pen. I was also just saying before we started recording for people listening that I did take the only thing I've done. Jen hasn't told me any questions in advance. So everything I do today is going to be completely off the cuff. The only thing I did do is I like to remind myself of the year. And what I've historically done is have a little look back at my diary to see what I did. Because I left university and lost access to my email and calendar, I couldn't do that this time. So I went back through the photos on my phone, which has been very lovely. So the only thing that I've got pre-prepared here is a little bit of stuff I've done in each month according to my rather overloaded iPhone photos folder. Other than that, I'm going to find out these questions at the same time our listeners do.
And there's nothing, I think, anything kind of magical or special about the questions, but the idea is just to kind of prompt yourself to look back. And I would say too that it isn't just about work. This is an opportunity to look at things in a more holistic way. So think about it in terms of work, family, think about it in terms of maybe your physical, your mental health. In other words, everything's on the table. There's no rules saying that you only have to focus on one aspect of your life. In fact, it's better if you try to look at all of it at the same time.
Cool. I can do that.
Yeah?
Excellent.
Okay, great. And I guess the other thing to maybe keep in mind too is that we could make endless lists but actually focus on what's most meaningful and important to you. So we're going to start on what's worked well in the last 12 months. And so let's start with something a bit fun, which is, what are the things that right away pop into your mind with your favorite memories?
Well, Jen knows this. Some of my listeners will know this. 2022 has been quite the year, I think it's fair to say. So my favorite memories of 2020 have to start with my wonderful then boyfriend Andy asking me to marry him in springtime. So that is absolutely a top highlight of the year. I also moved house, so moving back closer to my family and being back here has been a huge highlight. I had my inaugural lecture. So in the UK, as Jen knows, but for listeners, when you get made professor, you get to do your inaugural lecture, which is kind of about your life and all those sorts of things. Jen and I both got made professor in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic. So I finally only just got around to doing mine. And that was a real highlight. It ironically ended up being my first lecture as a professor and my last lecture before I left. So that was a real moment. Starting my business was another big thing, having my first paying clients and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I would say those are the, they feel like quite big life things, don't they?
Yeah, and those are fantastic memories. And I bet Andy, when he listens to this, will be really relieved that the proposal is number one.
Absolutely, of course.
But I think also maybe to say too is that when we think back on our favorite memories, they don't always have to be the big stuff. They can be some small stuff, but it's the things when you think, oh, you know what? You look back on those pictures on your phone or those moments that pop on your social media feed where you just like, these were the small things, but they were special and important. And actually, with this question, I love to start off with, because right away I could see, as soon as I asked it, you smiled, and I can almost see a lift in terms of like, oh, this is going to be fun. And so just getting down those memories, maybe like trips that you've taken or, you know, activities that you've done, just those things. So
I have a couple of examples, I think, of small things. So my dog, Marley, that you know, is highly reactive to other dogs. He's a super good boy, but he is somewhere between scared and excited with other dogs. And we knew moving back here, my mum has a dog and we were going to need them to be able to be in the same house. And this was a massive source of stress. We did tons of work, slowly introducing them and things like that. And this year, the early part of this year was the first time that they were able to walk around my mum's house, both off the lead and just ignoring each other. And I nearly cried. So that is a real memory for me. I also, Andy, my fiance, has teenage daughters, my stepdaughters, and I'm officially allowed to call them that now because he checked and I'm very excited. So I have lots of happy memories of us absorbing into being a family of 4. So there's a lot of small things there of us just playing stupid computer games together and things like that that are definitely very dear to my heart too, even though they're just small things.
yeah, and taking stock of that, pulling it all together starts to paint a really lovely picture of a year, and focusing on the happy memories. Sometimes the way our brains are wired is that it's easier to recall the negative stuff that happened than the positive. We have to work a little bit harder at it. And so starting with that question puts us on a really good front moving forward, because it now helps us to move straight into the next one, which is, what are the things that you achieved in the last 12 months? So in what ways do you feel like the year has been a success?
Okay, so that automatically gears my brain towards more work things, and you'll probably advise me in a minute that there's probably other ways that I could define success too. But from a work perspective, I finished 2 coaching qualifications this year. I'm super proud of that because I did it alongside what, you know, is a very busy full-time job as an academic. So that really took an enormous amount of my time and effort and things. And I was going to say sticking to things isn't always my strong point. I do finish things. I'm trying to remove the belief that I don't stick to things, because I do. I'm trying to sort of reduce that in my head. But to have committed to those and completed them, I'm really, really proud of that. So I'd say that is a success. I'm also mostly pleased with where my business is at the moment. Inevitably, with a brain like mine, I want to be going faster. But I've had amazing clients who've said really nice things about what they've achieved and the changes they've experienced through my coaching. And some of that's in my free group coaching, some of that is in my individual paying clients. And so that feels like a massive success when I have clients who renew their packages with me because they want to carry on, where they can see the progress they're making and they want to carry on working with me. That feels like huge success as well.
Yeah. And our brains often go to the work things. And so those are the big things. And I'm also thinking for you the stuff that you did to get that going. So the fact that you developed new skills around building a website, getting a podcast going, there's lots of things that you achieved this year that helped you to get to those big moments where you passed that course or you got that business going. So maybe just take a few moments to think about not just the outcomes that you got, but some of the things that you had to develop to help you get there.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because I think we often only measure it in terms of the end goal being achieved. But as soon as you said that, you're absolutely right. There's been a whole lot of structural stuff. You move away from university and suddenly you're like, hang on, I don't have Zoom. I don't have anywhere to put courses. I don't have any transcription software. I need to figure out all this stuff. And I have had to do all of that to get the business to where it is at the moment. And yeah, I think in terms of the preparing and completing the coaching courses, I had to fit it in the gaps, and I had to put time aside for it, and I had to prioritize doing practice coaching and going to the sessions and listening to hundreds, thousands of hours of other people coaching that I've listened to. And that does mean that there's other things that I haven't done this year. And I'm quite proud of that. I'm quite proud that I sort of focused in this year much more than I have done in previous years. So,
and that is so that you can look back and pick out those things. Because sometimes when we think back in a year, think, oh, what did I actually achieve? But you forget all the things that you had to put in place to get to those outcomes. And you think, where did all my time go? That's where your time went. And so taking stock on not just the outcomes, but the things that you did to get there, the processes, that's how I refer to them, can be super, super helpful. And I'm so glad that you're talking about what you're most proud of, because that's also a really good way to kind of help you work out what is the most meaningful things to you. And when you start to run out of ideas, another way to kind of help unlock more things is to kind of look at it from a different perspective. So I'm going to ask you to think about how the people who are closest to you would look at your year and say, what did you achieve? So what do you think they would answer? And how would that be different from ones you just gave?
You're going to make me cry now. I know Andy would say that I have created our home here. So one of the things I do is sort of go, oh my God, I didn't make enough progress in my business in September. It was my first month being full time. And Andy always reminds me, you literally did everything, because he works an hour away from here. He's deputy head. He has a really busy job. And so I was the one who was coordinating the people putting in the carpets and putting up the utility room cupboards. And we moved from an old house to a modern house, and lots of our furniture was really old. And so there was quite a lot of buying of furniture and those sorts of things. And these were all luxury problems. I don't want to present this as stressful. We've been super lucky, but it was a lot of decisions and a lot of coordinating. And we're in a new build, so it's making the snagging list and making sure they actually do the snagging list and all of those things. So I know Andy would say that a really big success is that home feels like home, and that's really important to all of us. I know my family would say, so my sort of family of origin would say that my decision to move back here was a big success. So for those of you who don't know, I moved to Birmingham as an undergraduate student when I was 18 and never left. So I went from undergrad to professor in the same department and have lived in Birmingham that whole time, so like 26 years. No one ever thought I would move back to my village. And whilst I was working in universities, that just wouldn't have ever been possible. And I moved back partly because I wanted that change of lifestyle, but I also moved back because my family are really, really important, and they're here and some of their health isn't as good as it could be. And then I've got nieces and nephews growing up all around this area. And I wanted to prioritize that. And I know that came, not that I wanted to prioritize, it came as a shock, but the fact that I was actually going to do it and move back was a really good shock for the family. And so I think there's some success there around being able or willing to make that really big life change to come back here.
Yeah, and these are huge things. Being able to make big life decisions, to be essentially a project manager of a massive project, moving house, setting up a new home, that involved lots of skills and lots of achievements. And I'm so glad that you picked up on those things by just thinking about it from someone else's perspective, because right away it shifted you off of work and onto home, family, and other things. So sometimes actually looking at it from different perspectives can help us to unlock things that we haven't quite seen for ourselves, but also to get maybe a more balanced view on it as well.
Can you hear that? The dog's dreaming.
Marley wants to join on the podcast as well.
I mean, Marley is always a success in my life. In fact, I'd say 80% of the photos on my phone are me and Marley. So he's a clear success too.
So the next question for us to think about is, and some of it you've answered already, but I'm going to ask it anyways, because sometimes a little repetition is useful because it might help us to uncover things we hadn't quite got around to thinking about on the previous one. So this one, it's around what were important projects completed.
Important projects completed. So definitely the coaching qualifications. Definitely you referred to the house move as a project, and by all definitions a project, I guess it was. So that for sure. Setting up this podcast was a massive project. So it now is something that sort of ticks over as part of my standard work week. But the whole, how am I going to do it? How am I going to record it? How long is it going to last? What's it going to be? All of those things, making the little artwork for the icon and all that stuff. I hope you like it. I'm super proud of it. So those are big projects. We're starting to plan the wedding. That's going to be a project. I have a venue, an address, and a photographer. So that project is underway. The other thing I think I have, because it feels so long ago, you can tell me if other people experience this. I sometimes find when I'm reviewing my year, I struggle with the first half of the year because it just feels so long ago that I think in my head I neglect it a little bit. I had 25 dissertation students this year, all doing their own projects, and I love them all dearly. If any of you are listening, I miss you. But that was huge. So I think finishing out last academic year and wrapping up a 20-year career and sort of finishing things off, handing things over, was actually more of a project than I probably recognize looking back, because it feels like ancient history now.
And well done, because sometimes the things that happen more recently are the easiest things to remember, but gathering up the photos and prompts can be really useful tools for this type of looking back. And so people do it differently. Some have paper diaries, some have online diaries, social media feeds, but essentially you probably have this record of your year without even realizing it. Mm-hmm. So just pulling that all together as you work through this type of reflection can be useful, but also say it doesn't have to be exhaustive either, because already I think you've picked up on some of the most important things for you. And that's really that point, because already I get the sense it's filling you with this like, oh, wow, actually, there's so much more to this year than I really am giving myself credit for, because my immediate thoughts were like these 2 or 3 things, but actually you've come up with 7, 8, 9, 10 things just through those first 3 questions. And that's really the point.
And I love that idea of almost triangulating different sources, because I can imagine PhD students listening to this, academics listening to this, might go to monthly reviews with your supervisor, things like that. Members of staff do annual performance reviews. So I can imagine going to those sorts of documents for what projects you've done and things. But actually, we all know that just keeping that particular piece of kit functioning in the laboratory because it breaks down every 10 minutes and you worked out why and got it sorted. Those things don't necessarily go on progress forms, but were huge projects, getting your ethics applications sorted or whatever it might be. So I love that idea and just wanted to highlight for people listening that idea of looking in several different places where you might have a record of what you've done this year.
I think that's a good point because everyone will have their own kind of repository. When I started doing this type of review a couple of years ago, I think I realized that what I was writing down was mostly work stuff. And so actually this has really helped me to start to think about, actually I need to record the good stuff that's happened in my life as well. And so when I take stock, then I'm thinking about those things and not just the work stuff. So that's another way to also maybe able to move it forward. But it helps us to maybe take the next step into our question. So we've really focused the first bit on more of the outcomes. I've started to prompt you around the processes, but now we're going to dive more into the processes. Okay. So let's start by asking you about the good habits that you have developed or maintained over this year. So I'm not interested in the bad ones. I'm just interested in the good
habits. Know my bad habits already.
I do. Yeah, I do. I have to say I do.
You've seen them firsthand.
But we're taking a strength-based approach. And so I don't think we often take stock of the good habits because maybe they're so automatic, we take them for granted. But actually, you have to work to get them there. And good habits are just as easy to lose as bad habits. So let's name them, let's identify them so that you can feel really proud that you have these good habits.
Okay, one thing that jumped out as you were talking is I think I've been really brave this year. I don't know whether being brave is a habit, but I'm going with it. I jumped into both of the coaching qualifications and was like, yeah, going to do it. It's alongside my work. It's huge, but I'm going to do it. Obviously, the decision to move, the decision to leave work, to go full time on the business, to frame it as a habit of taking big steps quite boldly. I sometimes overthink them beforehand, but when I do it, I'm quite happy to do it. So I think that's one. And that's now helping me too, in that I'm feeling quite comfortable now being bold about approaching people about the PhD training courses that I'm going to be offering at universities and things like that. I feel quite happy to just message people and be like, hello, this is amazing. Your students should have it. Let's talk. So I think, does that count as a habit? Is that the sort of thing?
You know what? I think we can, because a habit is a behavior that you develop. And then when you can start to use it easily without having to think about it too much, then it's become a habit. It's also one of your strengths. So we'll come on to strengths in a minute. So being brave is an important quality that you have. And you're able to use that quality to help move forward on big goals. So it really is part of the important processes that you've had this year. But let's think too about even the small things, the things that you do maybe on a daily basis without even thinking about it, that support you in being healthier, being happier, being more productive.
This is going to sound like a funny one, but it absolutely is a habit that I stand by. I am really good at resting. Resting's probably not the right word. I am really good at boundaries around work and fun stuff. So one of the things that I saw is that academia can become all consuming. It can become everything you do. There's no time to do anything else. There's no time to have any hobbies. You just can't do it. And I have always had the habit of doing other things. And so I've always had that habit that if I don't have things booked for an evening, I've done circus, I've done comedy, I've done all sorts of random things. And I think that was really important in academia. I know I've talked on the podcast before about how that was part of what helped me to be able to leave, was my whole identity wasn't wrapped up in academia. But it's also helping me now. You know, anyone who's set up their own business knows that it's really easy for it to become all consuming. But I think a habit I do have is that mostly when I shut down in the evening, I've shut down and I'm not going back and doing work things. I'm not eating into family time with work. I need to get better at the starting in the morning bit of it, but I'm really good at the stopping in the evening bit.
But as a good habit, it's something that brings you all kinds of benefits from what you've just described. And one of them is that it's given you the opportunity to try out different activities. And it doesn't almost matter what the activities were. It's not having done the activity is the habit. The habit is actually being able to separate work from life and then creating the time to be able to enjoy different things. And I know from obviously knowing you well that they've given you, new people in your life. They've given you new skills. They've given you, I think also strengths that you hadn't realized in terms of like performing circus match. Like who knew? Amazing.
Maybe I'll post that video online.
Yeah, that'd be great. That also leads us straight into talking about your strengths and your qualities. So you already mentioned a couple of them, but what are the ones that pop into your mind in terms of what do you think are your greatest strengths?
So on top of the ones I've said, enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is always a strength. It's something that, I don't know, just keeps things feeling positive. I know it's something that people around me generally enjoy. Sometimes it's a bit much. My dad used to talk about getting Vickied when I was too over enthusiastic, but mostly I think people feel like it's a bit infectious and they leave feeling more enthused than they started. So definitely enthusiasm. What other strengths? Another strength, and again, might not sound like a strength at first, is I do overthink, but I also don't care too much. So one of the things with, for example, making this podcast is I could be super perfectionist about it. I could script it all out. I could record it 5 times to make sure it's perfect. I could spend hours and hours and hours researching all the most up-to-date research to make sure that absolutely everything's evidenced all the way through. Could do all of those things. But actually, I think it would then be a real struggle to produce a weekly podcast, and you'd probably lose some of the humanness of it. So I think a strength of mine is that I'm quite good at going, get out there, that'll do. Happy days, people like it, without sort of going, did I say too many times? Was it too personal? Was it too impersonal? Was it boring? It's like, okay, it's done. People will find it valuable. Let's get it out. So I think that's probably a quality that's proving quite useful at the moment as well.
Yeah, and knowing you as we do, I absolutely totally agree. And one of the things we talked about, having different perspectives be really valuable. So thinking about it from one of your best friends, maybe that's where I can help you out with a few more strengths as well. So I think it's also okay to ask the people around you to say, well, what would you say are my greatest strengths? And for me, I would say that some of your greatest strengths is your creativity. So you've got an incredibly creative mind and you are such a good problem solver. So if anybody's got a problem, you can come up with a solution and usually your brain's jumped 5 steps ahead to work out exactly how it should be done. I mean, not too many people have that ability. So there's so many strengths, but one of the things that I've found in my own work is that helping people to reflect on strengths can be a skill in and of itself. And there's lots of things out there that can help. So there is, for example, the Values in Action website where you can fill out a very long survey to work out your signature strengths. And there's also the Gallup Strength Finder. So some people use that to work out what are your strengths. And they're very different strengths on these 2 different tools. But one of the things that we've done on our own website, so it's Sports Psychology Reaching New Territories Sprint Project. And on there, we've got a tool for helping you to reflect on your strengths in a way that makes it really meaningful to you because you come up with the labels for your strengths. There's not predetermined things that you get on these other websites, which can be really useful if that's something you struggle with. But on this strengths tool, it helps you to create a profile of your strengths, with the idea being that once you have an idea what those strengths are, you're in a better position to use them. And so the more we use our strengths, then the stronger the strengths get. Then we start to also be able to use them to offset maybe areas that we want to develop too. And that's really quite a lovely way. So in other words, I do know that when we use our strengths, some of our weaknesses take care of themselves without actually having to pay attention to them. Where we put our energy and attention is often where we see our success, but sometimes the weaknesses just take care of themselves then.
I love that because I think before I got more involved in the kind of coaching and that side of things. I did still focus, despite your advice over the years, I did still focus on the things that I needed to get better at doing. I was a little bit obsessed that I didn't have enough of a routine, that I wasn't good at sticking to habits, I wasn't consistent. I need to be organized and capable and on it and those things. And there was a period of my life where, in the attempt to fix those things, I was squishing some of the things that were best about me. And I love the idea. I can really see how creativity, problem solving, enthusiasm, it's very kind of you to say I have those strengths, but those sorts of strengths, how they could really make it not that necessary for me to have really consistent, organized, highly structured practice. And that actually, if I keep being creative and problem solving and being enthusiastic about it, I'm going to get loads of things done that are important and valuable. So yeah, it feels different. You know, I can feel in myself like, yeah, I can do more of that. That would be great, kind of thing. And I hope our listeners are starting to, you know, we're going to give you the questions afterwards. You'll be able to get them from Jen. But even as you listen, I hope you're starting to think, okay, what would be my strengths?
So moving on then, we talked about your strengths. We talked about how you've used some of those strengths. So let's move on to a different kind of question. I'm going to ask you now, when you think back on your year, what was time well spent? What was money well spent?
Ooh, I love this. Well spent was Andy. So I was single for a really long time, as you know. And so I had a really rich life outside of work, tons of different friends, tons of different activities that I was doing. And when I met Andy and things I thought could get serious and amazing, I did have to make some decisions about how I was going to do my time. And it would have been quite easy to see him once or twice a week, try and keep up all my previous hobbies, all my previous everythings. And it's not that I ditched everything by any stretch, but I thought it could go somewhere and I put time into it. And I'm obviously super, super glad that I did, because everything is wonderful. That's probably the thing where there was the real decision about how I was spending time. And now, just in this last few months, I'm just so able to see my family for like 15 minutes just because I'm bored and not getting any work done. So I'll walk over with the dog and say hello and have a cup of tea and come back. And being able to put time in like that is really, really meaningful for me. I think I'm pretty good at keeping up with old friends as well. So obviously I've moved away from Birmingham, so lots of people there like you are becoming further away, and I always wish I'd put more time in, but any time I spend connecting with people like you and other old friends that are around the country that I don't necessarily get to see face to face as much as I would like, any time I spend on that always feels like good time. My wedding is going to be filled, well, with you and with several people that I've known for 30 years, 40 years, and that's really lovely. So yeah, I think those things time wise.
Putting time into relationships is a really big one. So money well spent then.
We spent a whole ton of money putting stuff into the house. We've been pretty sensible with that though. So I feel like that's money well spent because we've not been excessive on it. So that is good money spent. I've spent money on coaching, have individual coaching. And in my opinion, that is always money well spent. An enormous amount of what I've not just achieved, but the way I've lived for the last few years has been because of those individual and group coaching programs that I've been part of. So I will shout out Kristen Carter, Focused, I Have ADHD podcast is amazing. Paula Engelbertson, I've also had individual coaching from. I am now joining Karen Nordine's program, and so I'm spending money on that too. So definitely check out all of those if you're listening. So that money spent on personal development has been great. The other thing that was money well spent, and Andy will not forgive me if I don't mention it, Andy has always claimed to be a minimalist. He moved in here with very little stuff other than tools. He is now, partly thanks to me, the proud owner of an absolutely obscene amount of Lego, like obscene amount of Lego. And so he would want me to say that all the money I have spent on Lego was definitely money well spent because it makes him very happy.
Yeah, and I'm definitely sensing a pattern in terms of really this year being a lot about relationships for you, and how actually so much of what we talked about in terms of time, money, achievements has come down to that. And I think one of the nice things about doing this kind of reflection is that you do start to see those patterns in terms of what has been the focus of your year. And it often all starts to make sense to you, like, yeah, that's why. But rather than getting into the cycle of like, where has it gone and what have I done? No, actually, I hope that by talking this through, you can start to see how full and busy and exciting, but also very meaningful and important are the things that you've done and why you've done them and how you've done them. It gives yourself more credit than you probably realize.
Definitely, because one of the things I did realize as I went through my photos was that I haven't done as many cool and fun things as I usually do. So I volunteered for the Commonwealth Games, which is one thing that I have completely forgotten to mention so far, which was a really big and amazing thing. But usually I volunteer on adventure races, I do paddleboard polo tournaments, I do all sorts of random bits of pieces. And when I was looking at the photos, my initial reaction was a bit like, loads of really, really good stuff. Don't get me wrong, 2022 is going to be a year that goes down in my memory like a proper milestone year. But there was part of me that was a bit like, yeah, but you haven't done those things. But when you say it like that, the theme around relationships and stuff, and that you can't have all the things you can't focus on everything all the year because then it's not a focus. But actually I'm like, you know what, that's cool. There hasn't been as many stupid, ridiculous adventure things, partly pandemic driven, it has to be said, but there hasn't been as many of those things. But that's okay, because if you'd told, I mean, mate, the conversations we've had, if we'd been told 18 months ago that I would be engaged, running my own business, not working academically, both of us would think that we're absolutely insane. You know, that was just not on the agenda. And so yeah, I think it's really interesting to try and pull out what's your theme of the year like that and really recognize how big that's been.
And if you had just only focused on what hadn't gone well, then actually probably would have come away with very different feelings about the year than by taking a look at it in this way. Already you're starting to go, oh yeah, that bit's okay. I've done it in previous years, but this year it's been about other things. It's been about other things, and actually it's been about wonderful, exciting things that have helped my life feel fuller and different, and yeah, which is so exciting and leads me straight into the next question, which is, and I think you're going to enjoy this one, who has supported you, nurtured you, and who have you enjoyed supporting and nurturing?
Oh, okay, I'm pulling overwhelmed faces for those who are listening on the podcast. So many people, which is really lovely to look back and think. So obviously Andy and the girls and my family here, people like you, people like, I'm not going to list off all my friends, because then if I forget somebody, then I'm going to offend them. But the list would be too long. But I've been supported by old friends. I've been supported by colleagues in the department where I used to work. So yeah, particularly value, I think, the support that my parents have given me, because I think it would have been very, very easy for them to tell me that leaving a secure professorship at a prestigious university to set up your own business because you wanna is a ridiculous idea. It would have been very easy for them to be like, oh, what are you doing? And they have been all in on all of it. And that has been huge. And then who have I enjoyed supporting? I mean, hopefully all of those people back, hopefully my family, you, my other friends, I feel like they're all really reciprocal relationships. And I hope other people feel like that too. I've loved supporting my clients, whether they're the freebies that come on to my group coaching on Wednesdays or whether they're my paid clients. I loved supporting my students while I still had them, and I miss them. And I love this podcast. I hope that the people who listen to this podcast feel like it's support too, because that's how it's intended to feel.
Yeah, and of course we won't forget Marley and all this.
Oh, and yes, he supports me. Oh my goodness, I can't forget the four-legged one. He's sat down there as we speak. He is within 2 meters of me at all times. And even though there are occasions where I want to leave him on the doorstep for somebody else to take away, when he's just barked at another dog again, he's absolutely a support for me all the time.
And I think that's one of the nice things about focusing on this question. It brings a whole new dimension to our year as well. It just gives you that kind of fuzzy feeling of all the support going both ways. You receiving and you giving, and just that recognizing of that is just a lovely moment when we reflect back.
It's good advice. I feel super positive. Just play devil's advocate here. There may be people listening who don't feel they've been well supported this year. So for me, that question is wonderful because it brings me warm fuzzies. And I genuinely can't think of anybody that I wish I had support from that I don't. So for me, that's an entirely positive question. And I guess with any of these questions, how would you advise somebody who looks at those and goes, I don't feel like I have been supported, or I don't feel like I have had any good habits, or I don't feel like I have had any successes?
Yeah. And that's where some of the coaching, self-coaching can come into play. So what I would then ask the person is just to give me a sense of that on a scale like 1 to 10. So let's say 1 is the worst it could possibly be in terms of how you spent your time. 10 is the best it could be. So of course those are arbitrary, but it's what's meaningful to you. And I'd ask the person where on that scale would they be? And it could be that they tell me 1. They could say, actually, I'm -1. They could say, actually, maybe it's about a 5. But whatever the number is, we can then work from that. It might need some creativity to work it out. So for example, on the relationship question, who supports and who do you support? It may take a bit of creativity, but there will be something there. And it's a starting point to work from. And the reason why I believe in it is because having worked for a long time on a project with young people experiencing homelessness, you would think this is a group where social support is an issue. And for some, it would be really difficult for them to come up with answers to those questions. And we do an activity called a team where we get them thinking about different people in their lives and who supports them, and using the analogy of a football team. So for example, who's their team manager, who's their coach, but for some, they couldn't always name a person. So sometimes it was a pet, or sometimes it was an object. So I guess to say that we don't have to have a very fixed definition of these things too. There's no hard and fast rules. We can come at it in very creative, very broad ways to make it meaningful and important to the person. Because remember I said at the beginning, that's actually kind of the key rule that we're following here. And so we can also, park a question too. We don't need to have to answer it right now too. We can come back to it another time. That's okay as well. So in other words, we don't have to just automatically assume too that just because our first instinct is that we can answer it, doesn't mean that with a little bit of more digging and reflection, we might be able to get there. It's just that our answers may not be what we were expecting at the beginning.
I love that. And I love the idea of being creative with it. Things that ping into my head, I could imagine people feeling that they're supported by the person who sells them their Starbucks in the morning, or even you feel supported by Taylor Swift because her songs make you think that people understand you, or whatever it is. I could imagine people feeling supported by people they don't even know. Perhaps people feel supported by people they follow on Twitter because they just see that somebody else is struggling with the same things that they are.
You don't need to have a fixed notion about what that means, but actually being flexible and really trying to embrace it in that sort of way. And I think it can unlock all kinds of answers for yourself. So it can be something as small as like when I'm commuting and the nice person who works at the train station who looks like when I'm struggling with my bags opens the gate for me. That kind of small thing can make such a big difference. So let's move on to another one. And in this one, again, thinking back on our year and thinking back to times maybe when we experienced obstacles, setbacks. And what I want us to focus on is, what are the things you did to overcome them? So it doesn't really matter what the obstacle setbacks were, but what were the things that helped you overcome them?
Ooh, okay. I mean, all that support. So all the people around me, definitely. Constraint. And I know for you know me long enough will know that that has been a long time coming and something that I'm working on. But one thing that has definitely helped is really learning to believe. And I now think I'm at a stage where I can say I do believe that I don't have to do everything, that I can generate the life I want with fewer things than I thought I did. And when I say things, I don't mean stuff. I've never been someone who needed to buy lots of things, but I mean, I always thought I had to have 50 different hobbies and 50 different friends and 500 projects going on at work. So constraint has really helped. I don't think I would have got through spring and summer the way I did if I hadn't accepted that because I was doing those coaching qualifications, I had ridiculously busy academic term and I had the wonderful Andy, that other things were going to have to give and that was okay. So I think constraint helped enormously. I think a healthy dose of blind optimism has helped. A sort of just belief that this will all work out, that the world needs the service that I want to provide through my business, and therefore that one way or another I'm going to make this work so that I can support PhD students and academics.
Excellent. And through these different questions, by asking them in different ways, I think what we've done is hopefully revealed to yourself a long list of strengths. So we start off with bravery, we've ended with optimism, but there's a whole long list in between. Actually thinking back on our year in very positive strength-based ways, but using different perspectives, using different kind of questions. Sometimes we have some overlapping answers, but actually we come up with all kinds of really good, interesting stuff. So how are you feeling now about your year, having done this reflection?
More emotional than I thought I would be. Really positive. It's interesting how much it's making me spin forwards and think about, exactly what you intend. Think about how I can use those and maximize going forwards, and what do I want, and not even more of necessarily, but how can I just keep doing those things and recognizing those things. Because I think it's really easy, and I'm sure listeners will resonate with this, it's really easy to take for granted the things that you find easy and the things that come somewhat naturally to you. So some of those qualities I've talked about, things like constraint, are things that I'm really worked on, and so those are things that I feel super proud of. No one will tell me that's easy, because that's something I've struggled with my whole life and I feel like I'm really making progress with. Whereas being brave enough to just jump in is something that my parents will tell you I did a lot as a child, usually into something muddy or off something I shouldn't be jumping off. And so some of those things, I think it's easy to take those for granted. And so I think this sort of process that you've taken me through of identifying what those are and kind of going, there's a lot of people that those would be the things they consider their weakness, that they would like to change about themselves. I think it's really nice to recognize that. So it's making you feel very satisfied and motivated, which is good.
That is exactly the aim of it. And because you're absolutely right, the next step, which is beyond this kind of podcast, is start to think about what is it that you want to continue doing? What is it that you want to maybe start doing more of? Because maybe there's strengths still to be uncovered, strengths still to be developed. Maybe there's strengths that you could use in different ways for different things, like a strength you might just use for work. Maybe you could be using over here for your family or relationship, or vice versa. So the next step would be to start thinking about it. And one of the ones I like using is just a basic stop, start, continue. You don't need to be complicated here. Just have a way to build on this reflection, because right away our brains start to move forward and think, okay, so what's next? What's going to happen next year? Where do I want to move towards? What is it that I want to achieve? And so before you even do that, use this reflection to help you create the vision of what 2023 is going to be for you. And so that's when you start to think about, how is it that you're going to use these strengths to achieve what's coming up next for you? You've got a wedding in the future, you've got a business that you're continuing to plan, build, but there'll be other things up ahead. And how can these strengths be used to really help you get the most out of your year?
I love that. And I know our listeners will be feeling just as motivated and energized by that as well. And I really hope all of you listening take the time to really ponder some of these questions for your own lives so that you can identify your own strengths and the things that you've got through this year and the things that you've achieved and enjoyed, so that you can go into 2023 feeling as excited and motivated as I do right now. Thank you so much, Jen.
You're very welcome. And I would just say there's one final step before you sign off, which is when you finish the reflection, you need to celebrate having done this review, because this has been, it's mentally and emotionally something you go through. I brought you around from the start going, this is interesting, this is different, to, ooh, this is quite emotional, to, wow, I learned something about myself. So how are you going to celebrate? It doesn't have to be a big thing, but how are you going to celebrate having done this review?
I'm going to celebrate the way I always do, which is by telling Andy and telling my mum. And you've already made me think, I had my 2 teenage stepdaughters now, you've already made me think that these would be really interesting questions to ask them too. So I think I will be celebrating myself. I've always been jealous. You know, I have always been jealous of your amazing reviews and bullet journals and your ability to stick to all of those things and have this incredible catalogue of the things you've done over the last 10 years. And so I don't underestimate how much doing a review like this is important and something to celebrate. So I think that's really important, and I will. So what I was going to say, though, is thank you so much. As usual, you're amazing. And I hope you will come back on the podcast at some point in the future, because I know you have a million things that you could contribute and that our listeners would love to hear from. If they want to hear more from you in the meantime or find out more about this, how would they go about that?
You just need to come along to visit our website, which is sprintproject.org. We've got blogs, we've got tools, everything's free. And people find it really, really useful. So anything you heard today, you'll find the tools to help support you through it.
Amazing. And on Twitter, you are at Dr. Jenn Cumming, is that right?
At Dr. Jenn Cumming on Twitter.
Perfect, because Jen also in another life gives amazing advice about writing and writing routines and structuring your writing and all those sorts of things. So if you want to know more about that, make sure you're following her on Twitter too. I will put her Twitter handle and the links in the show notes on my website. So thank you so much, Jen. I really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for listening.